For this past Christmas, I was extremely spoiled by my wonderful boyfriend. He bought me a very large handful of professional watercolors, which I've been wanting for a really long time. Recently, I purchased a handful of M-gram paints, and I did have some Daniel Smith paints, and between those two, I made a palette, and it was around, I want to say it was like 10 to 12 colors is what I ended up having in my palette at the time, and from there, I was able to kind of nail down what paints would benefit me and what would be convenient for me to have in a palette, because the palette I had, while it did have a very good selection of colors, it didn't have a lot of convenient things like blacks, deeper browns, deeper shades as a whole. I had to mix my own, which was really beneficial for me as a person because I felt like artistically that really nailed in the concept of color theory, and I've never really been in the position where I had to mix my own blacks. I had to mix my own browns and things like that. Normally I have a color palette that has those colors, so I never have to worry about that. But the palette I had forced me to be more knowledgeable about mixing colors, which was very beneficial to me. But it just became like an inconvenience to have to mix these colors for myself. And there were certain colors that I felt like would really benefit myself in my palette. So I picked out a bunch of colors and added them to my Christmas list. And he very kindly purchased every single one, which I was not expecting, but that was really exciting because I was able to get my palette to the point that I wanted to get it to. So there was quite the handful of paints that I ended up adding, and most of them were M-gram paints. However, there were a couple of Daniel Smith paints that I decided to add along as well. I definitely can say that I do prefer M-gram paints. However, I do also really like Daniel Smith. I feel like there's good qualities of both of them. And Daniel Smith as a whole has more interesting colors, I would say, because they have granulating paints. And if you're unfamiliar with granulation in watercolor paints, it's basically when the pigment almost like clumps together in certain areas and creates different textures and tones within the one color itself. So it kind of breaks down, especially for some colors more than others, into like different colors and just different tones, and it's a very textured and cool thing to play with. And I used to really not enjoy having any kind of texture in my art, but that's something I've really enjoyed recently. So diving into having not only professional paints, but on top of that granulating paints has been really interesting for me. So the main granulating paints that I ended up getting was Daniel Smith's Cobalt Teal Blue, Rose of Ultramarine, and Moonglow, which I really like all of them. I think the one that I like the most is Moonglow, just because you can get such a variety of colors out of just the one color itself. Moonglow itself is kind of like a muted purple color almost, but you can get pinkish tones, you can get blue tones out of it. A very pretty selection of colors can come out of this, as well as just texture that shows up on its own from the granulation. And by no means am I good at using granulation, and by no means do I know like the proper ratios and stuff to really bring out the granulation when it comes to these paints, but I've been having a lot of fun playing with them, and I think they do add really cool textures to paints. I did end up using these quite a bit in the illustration that I ended up creating with these paints, but as a whole, I feel like those were a very nice addition to my palette. Also, very weirdly, my favorite color that I ended up adding to this palette was M-gram's Naples Yellow. This was something that I got the idea from Arlie Bean on YouTube. She mentioned in one of her videos that she mixes skin tones with Naples Yellow as well as a couple other colors. And previously, I personally was using Azo Yellow as well as like Daniel Smith's Pyrrole Scarlet to mix my skin tones, and maybe a little bit of a blue here and there, but it just wasn't cutting it for me, so I wanted to try a Naples Yellow, and I was really torn between pretty much all the colors. Anytime I knew there was a certain color I wanted to add to this palette, I was torn between getting it as a Daniel Smith paint or if I wanted to get it as an M-gram paint. Because while I did use the dot cards that I got from Daniel Smith to kind of be like, okay, this color would be beneficial and this color would be beneficial, when it came to M-gram paints, which were the ones that I wanted more, I didn't know exactly what those paints looked like in person. So that definitely made it a little bit more difficult in choosing paints. There are many people who have swatched them and posted those pictures online, as well as M-gram has their own official like swatch sheet available online of all their different colors, but it is really hard to kind of judge what it actually looks like in person. But I decided to go with M-gram's Naples Yellow, and it is such a gorgeous color. It's honestly probably my favorite individual color I have, just because it's such a nice yellow, and I never thought I would say that because I'm not a huge fan of yellow. I think yellow is important in certain places, but it's just yellow. It's not my favorite color or anything, but Naples yellow is such a gorgeous yellow. It really reminds me of one of the Copic markers I have. I think it's cashmere. It's this just very nice and warm, almost like orangey tone yellow. It's just a very pretty color. And that has really been like extremely beneficial for me mixing skin tones. I've been mixing my skin tones with just Daniel Smith's Pyrrole Scarlet as well as M. Graham's Naples Yellow, and it's a really nice combination to get just like a warm, nice skin tone. I really enjoy doing that. So those have been my go-to for mixing lighter skin tones for sure. I also had a lot of fun, like I mentioned before, playing with the granulation with these paints. I used Moonglow for pretty much all of the like black, what was supposed to be black, I painted with Moonglow because I find it to be very pretty. Like, I have my own black paint. I got Lunar Black from Daniel Smith because that one also granulates, but I've pretty much just been using Moonglow for everything that's black, and I've been really, really enjoying the way it looks. Just like the amount of texture and the amount of difference of like colors and shades that you can get within one paint. It's just been very, very fun and enjoyable to play with. So as a whole, I am really, really happy with how my professional watercolor palette is going so far. Obviously, I have filled up all the space intended for half pans, and while I can squeeze some in the center, I don't know if I will. I feel like I have a very well developed and what I need in my palette sort of situation going on. The only thing that I would want to change out, which I know I probably will in the future, is I have a titanium opaque white by M. Graham in this palette, and the only reason that that color is in this palette is because it's a color I received through Art Snacks. So when I was setting up my palette initially with my professional watercolors, I figured I would put it in there anyways just because I had it and I had the space for it, but white is not a color that I use like at all when it comes to watercolors, so there's really no need for that to be taking up space in my palette when I could put something else instead in that spot. So I'm sure eventually, if I ever come across a certain tube that I want to purchase and add to my palette, I'm sure I'll swap it out, because I think I've probably used that titanium white like maybe twice in the entire time that I've had this palette, which, given it hasn't been a lot of time that I've had this palette, but I have actually been using this a lot. I've been having a lot of fun playing with watercolors lately, so I'm very glad that I was able to expand my palette, and I really, really enjoy working with it. Just the selection of colors I have and the way the palette physically looks, because it's a nice pretty rainbow for the top row, I just really like it. It makes me very inspired to keep painting with watercolors, and I really enjoy using this palette. I also decided to try a new technique with this piece, and I've done it a couple times before using it in this piece, but I wanted to play with it a little bit more, and that is doing the line work with my Prismacolor colored pencils. I've done this previously, but recently I just figured I would whip them out and try it. I initially was using my Verithin colored pencils for a couple of other pieces, and then I switched to my Prismacolor Premier colored pencils, but the reason I switched over from the Verithin was because I don't have a huge selection of the Verithin pencils, and the main ones I use are red pencils, and those ones got really, really short because the lead inside was just like constantly breaking, so I wasn't really using the pencil, it was just the lead inside was broken, so I would go to sharpen it, and then the lead would snap because it was already broken. It was just a pain in the butt. So I decided to switch over to my regular Premier colored pencils, and while I think it is fun using them, I'd rather do the line work in watercolors. I'm just kind of playing around with what I prefer doing the line work in, because I used to do a lot of my line work with, I went from fine liners to gel pens, and then I had a little phase recently where I used a pink Micron, and then regular pencils, like I used a black Verithin and a Prismacolor Color Race in like rose, and then I've been using watercolors lately to do my line work, but that's so time consuming, I feel like. So I was kind of hoping that Prismacolors would be faster, but still give the same soft and colorful line artwork that you can get with watercolors, but I don't know. I'm still kind of playing around with what I prefer to use, and I'm sure what I prefer to use will continue to change, but that is what I ended up doing for this piece. I also added accents with the Kuretake Gansai Tombi Starry Nights watercolor set. That's the gold watercolor set that you're seeing off to the right. And then that was the end of the piece. I really actually enjoy how this turned out. I know I didn't talk about it at all, and that's because I didn't want to go off on a tangent on Naruto, because I could talk about Naruto for a really long time. But as you can see in the video, you can see the texture within certain colors of the granulating colors, especially in the darker tones and the background. I just really enjoy the way it works, and I'm excited to play more with granulating colors in the future. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.